right, rehearsal's over. My name is Curt Anderson. This is Michael Stackpole. He creates games and I play games. He actually plays games as well. And we're here tonight to discuss and take questions on critical thought, skepticism, and board gaming. Tabletop gaming, other gaming, we don't limit it just to board gaming. That's like my biggest area of interest, but I certainly played role games. Oh, I'll give you a little interesting factoid here and give myself a little bit of credibility with DragonCon and gaming. The first ever $5,000 cash prize offered for a Dungeons & Dragons tournament was here at DragonCon in 1990 when it was only in the Westin. And the tournament was done in the top floor, and my home Dungeons and Dragons group from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, DM'd that game. So I helped DM for the first ever $5,000 cash prize Dungeons and Dragons tournament.
So it's your fault.
It's my fault.
Okay, there we go.
Right, and this was before many of you were born, I'm sure. So I've been involved in board gaming for a long time. And then I use board games as a way to help educate my kids. We homeschooled. My job was a professional magician. So my kids grew up in the back of a Suburban, traveling around the country as I cut my wife in half and made her float and things like that. And so we homeschooled them. And most of the people that I knew that were homeschooled were either brilliant or had difficulty passing basic curriculum. And I didn't want mine to just be, dumb. And I knew that they were kind of... the bricks were stacked against them just from a genetic standpoint. So I thought that it'd be important to really work with them with their schoolwork. And what we did is we told them that if you do your schoolwork and you get it done before your specific time limit, then you can play games. And then I went and bought games that had mechanics and themes based on the work we were doing in school. So they didn't know they were doing their work, so they could do bonus work. And so I think it took some critical thinking skills to put that together. And so that's just a little intro, and we'll get into more in that. How about you give us a little bit of your background in developing games, playing games, and critical thought and so forth yourself?
Sure. I sold my first game design when I was still in college.
Wow.
There was a role-playing game called Tunnels and Trolls. It was the second ever role-playing game. And when you D&D back in those days, if you didn't have a group, you really couldn't understand what it was because it was a miniatures game. And if you had no exposure to miniatures games, the rule books made no sense. I remember reading the chainmail rules, which you had to read back in those early days. And it would say, a horse can move 2 inches. And if you're not using miniature figures, that sentence makes no sense whatsoever. It can move 3 inches. It's bigger than 2 inches. What are they talking about? So that made no sense. And Tunnels and Trolls was much easier and very stripped down. And they had a whole series of choose your own adventures, or they were doing a series of choose your own adventure adventures. And so while I was still in college, I wrote a couple and finally sold one to them. So I was a published game designer by the time I got out of school and then went to work for them. In that first summer, I went to Arizona to work for Flying Buffalo. I got hired by a school system that was running a summer program for gifted children to teach them gaming. And their goal was the two things that you really get out of games is one, that promotion of critical thinking, because it's all problem solving. And the second thing is you get socialization out of it, which is so important for the development of kids. And I remember that summer, there was a kid, he was brand new to that school system, didn't know anyone, he was a small Japanese boy, and he would not say a single word in the class. I mean, I had him for 2-3 weeks and could not get him to say anything, which was enormously frustrating for me. I just thought, so my goal became this kid had to say something. He never did say a word. But as we were running adventures and stuff like that, everybody would look to him to nod or shake his head as to what they should do. And here was this kid, brand new, didn't know anyone, had no friends, and now he had a bunch of people that were, willing to talk to him, willing to hang out with him. and were hanging on his, well, not every word, but
Sure.
his nods. So so that worked out pretty
So
well.
the critical skills in thinking isn't just within the game; it's within the context of your group as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I oftentimes, one of the questions I get asked a lot is like, "What's your favorite game?" I own about 400 board games. What's your favorite game? And I've thought about that a lot, and it's dependent. Like, I don't think about having a game that's my personal favorite. What I really enjoy about gaming is the social aspect of it. And so my favorite game is the one that any particular board game group that I'm going to be with at the time enjoys the most.
Right.
So I have people that come to my house, or I go to other people's houses that really like the very engine builder type games. The, like, you got to calculate everything out. You're figuring 4 turns ahead, and you got to like make the best decision. And they look at it like the less luck, the better the game.
Right.
And so, like, Birmingham Brass and things like that, terraforming Mars and all these ideas. And there's some luck as to what cards you draw, but there's enough of that going on. They account for that. And then I have others who like what we call like the Ameritrash, where like you got to chuck some dice and take some chances, and it's different every time. See, like this smile right there when I start talking about chucking dice right there, right? He's like, yes, I like to chuck dice, right? And other people are like, no, it needs to be more like chess. And so I enjoy all of those games. And what I enjoy the most is to play a game with a group where they enjoy it, and you have these social aspects, and have these decisions to make. So, do you have any particular types of games that you enjoy? I know you really like role playing games. I enjoy role playing games as well.
Yeah, I mean, primary role playing games, just because that's kind of where I got my start. But
Sure.
I worked in the industry. I've worked in the industry for 45 years now. And one of the cool things, the very situation you're describing, one of the cool things for me is I remember, because when I was in college, you couldn't find games. You were buying them by mail, and they were not necessarily professionally produced.
Right.
And watching the growth of games and the acceptance of games in the United States, such that there are board games, and people that wouldn't identify themselves as gamers are having game nights, to me has been utterly amazing.
Well, they had a movie game night.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Sure.
there was, and I mean, Mattel spent a lot of money to try and tell, and the Wizards of the Coast as well spent a lot of money to try and set up, Thursday night game night or Friday night game night. And for those who don't know, in Europe, they've got a much stronger gaming tradition, especially in Germany. So there's a lot of the Euro games which are coming over here, and being very, very popular. And I remember I was out to dinner with a bunch of people on the soccer team that I played on, and I was listening to two of the wives, and they were talking about getting together to play Settlers of Catan.
Yeah.
And I mean, my head just snapped around because I know of it as an industry game. And I said, "You're playing Settlers?" And they said, "Yeah, do you know it?" And it's like, "Oh, wow." And for me, it was like, wow, this is how far it has made it now into, mainstream America.
I enjoy you dated yourself by calling it Settlers.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because when I bought my copy in '96, it was Settlers. Now it's Catan.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is to me, that is just a really, really cool thing, because again, the socialization aspect is, I just can't stress how important it is.
Sure.
That people, especially with the political situation where getting together with people, you get 3 people together, there's 5 fights. I mean, it's just not very, very healthy. And so it is a lot of fun and especially having games where people can cooperate. It's not just kill, or I'm going to get all the money or things like that. Which,
Right.
I mean, they still can be fun, but the cooperative games require a lot more in the way of strategy, and that is very neat. The other thing about working within the industry that I have enjoyed is being at conventions, usually not the big ones like this, but smaller ones, where you'll get a chance to play test a game.
Yeah.
So somebody's got a game, it's pre-production, they've got the rules, they think it's good. You get pulled in with a few other gamers, and you're play testing this. And I remember I was playing with James Ernest. He had designed a game called Deadwood Studios, where you're making Western movies on a budget. And he's a brilliant game designer, had a wonderful thing. And as we were coming down, I think there were 6 turns to the game. As we're coming into game 5, I look at the board and realize if I play the way normal people would play, I cannot win. And so I made a counterintuitive move, which should have lost me the game, but it just worked out the way the cards fell in the draw
Sure.
for projects that was enough to actually win the game. And having the designer sitting there going, that shouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
Do I have a problem? Do I have a flaw with my game we now have to solve? It was a really cool thing, watching someone else being creative and applying their skills right there to
Sure.
something to be corrected in the future.
So I've got a story similar to that. I got to play a game with the creators. But before that, make me jealous. Tell me you've been to Essen.
I have not been to Essen.
Oh, we should go.
No. Oh,
so Essen
absolutely.
is a board game convention that has a higher attendance than Dragon Con. It's in Germany. It is the premier board game event in the world. And it's like, I know people that save up, and every year they fly to Germany and go to Essen in Spiel, Germany. And so it's last year they had, I think, 125,000 people attend. And it's not a multi-track, it's board games.
Yeah.
And I would be my second home next to Dragon Con there. So one of my favorite games is a co-op with a mole.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Who Goes There? Anybody play Who Goes There? Wonderful game if you like games that's cooperative, but you have somebody that's potentially a mole. So it takes place in Antarctica, and it's supposed to be like The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. And so you can be infected, and you can draw cards. There's 12 cards throughout the game. You almost always get through all the cards. Not always, but almost always. And one of those cards has an X. So the first person to draw a card could be infected, or it could be the last person. And once you're infected, you need to try to infect as many other people as you can without too much. Because at the end of the game, whoever survives gets on a helicopter to fly back home. And if the infected gets on the helicopter with at least one human, that's the minimum requirement for the infected to win. And then in either case, you can have a game where no one wins, which is actually kind of fun. If everybody's infected, then nobody wins, because the infected can't spread it to the world.
Right.
And if the humans get on a helicopter with or without infected, then they have to earn a certain amount of points to win the game. So we bought this game in Jackson, Mississippi at a board game cafe. It turns out that the people that own the board game cafe created the game. And it was Certifiable Studios less than 2 miles away.
Right.
And so I was telling you how much I loved the game, and I had played before, and I'd been wanting a copy. And they were actually about half the cost of what you can get them online at the board game cafe.
Sure.
So they said, well, if you like it that much, I'll call the owners, and you can go down there, and they'll let you visit the studio, and they'll autograph the game and everything. So we did that. And I've talked to them several times, and we had some ideas for the game and for an expansion and stuff like that. And so one day I was going to be in Jackson, Mississippi. I said, hey, we'd love to come by and play the game with you. And they're like, that'd be great. So the two people that created the game, and myself, my middle child, my wife, and one of my best friends played this game. And so the main designer of the game was the captain of the team. That just kind of, whoever gets a certain number, their captain. And they get to decide who goes in the helicopter. And we fooled them badly enough that I got him to take me and two other people who were both infected, and left everybody that was human off the helicopter. So it was the worst loss he'd ever suffered, and he was convinced I was not infected. And so when we get done, I'm like, look, you got to take John, you got to take me, and we'll kill Slade because we know he's infected. And so he's like, yep, okay, we'll do that. We'll kill him. We'll take it. And so we do this. We get in the helicopter. And he goes, well, you have the most points, and John's got the second most points, so we clearly win. I said, well, that would be the case if either of us were human. And we turn over our card. He's like, oh. So he goes, I cannot believe that you literally beat me at my own game. And I was like, yes. But he said that, again, he had never seen anybody approach the game the way that we did. The way it was designed was to work a different strategy.
Right.
And so the way we played it just blew them away. You'd never seen anybody play it that way before.
It's very weird working within the industry and stuff. A million years ago, back before Gen Con had left Milwaukee, and literally before it was in downtown Milwaukee, this was while it was still at the university, a company called Thieves Guild had been running a tournament at all the conventions that year. Again, this was back in the 80s, and they decided at Gen Con that they wanted to run their tournament for professionals in the industry. So they got Greg Perrin, Steve Jackson, me, Lou Zocchi, a bunch of other guys to run through this role playing adventure.
Jackson's here this year, right?
Oh yeah, and Steve usually comes every year.
Yeah, he did a big autograph thing earlier.
Yeah.
Munchkin, he created Munchkin along a lot of other games.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, the GURPS and Ogre and things. Very talented man. When we went through the scenario, it was the same thing. We ended up they had run it all summer, and it came in 3 parts. And I guess in the games that they had run that summer, they'd gotten to part 2, they hadn't gotten through it, and they were running 5-hour sessions. And in 3 hours, all the professionals in the industry blew through the entire thing. And it was not because we were better players than anybody else, but when you're GMing for Steve Jackson and he suggests that a certain strategy should work, you, the GM, tend to agree with Steve Jackson that strategy should work. And so every time they threw up their problems, it would be Steve or Steve Perrin or somebody else would come up and make that suggestion. And what was fun was it was, sort of gaming the game itself and really just playing the psychology of the people playing the game, not even playing the rules. And you learn a lot about human nature that way, and it all makes it part of the fun of the game, I think.
Yeah. So, critical thinking skills. What do you think? Like, how do you think board gaming affects one's critical thinking skills?
Well, I think when you look at critical thinking skills, and a lot of the things that we do boil down to math. You have to make sure that everything works out.
Sure.
And when you're dealing with a game where there are values for dice and die rolls, you're trying to compute all of those angles. Compute what the odds are, what the best strategies are, and you're having to do it. Every 30 seconds there's a die roll. Every 30 seconds everything changes.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to figure out that and having the human element come into it as well. Games just are these critical thinking engines. If you can master critical thinking, you're going to do well. And if you don't have those skills, you're going to be lost. So
it also takes some wisdom when to moderate this. So how many of you are Catan players, right? Or played, right? So my favorite move, if you want to never play with the same crowd again, is you're gonna, within the first 5 games that you play with folks, you're gonna have a game where everybody has a million sheep. It just happens, right? Save your Monopoly card. Wait till you've rolled, 4 6s in a row, and you have more sheep you can possibly hold than you thought for sure. Somebody roll a 7, you're gonna be discarding these. Trade all your sheep away. 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, doesn't matter. Everybody's got a bunch of sheep, or trade all your sheep away. Say, look, I'll trade you 3 sheep for a brick, or 4 sheep. I'm going to trade 4 in for a wheat anyways. I'll trade you 4 sheep for a wheat. Trade all of them away. Then play your Monopoly card. You get the 20 sheep you traded and the 20 sheep that everybody else has, and then you just build everything and win the game. No, they'll never trade with you again. So you have to win without trading for the next, 20 years. But it's a great move. The first time I did that, I ended up with 36 sheep in my hand. I won the game. I ran 4 points in 1 turn. So the Monopoly card. And then if you get someone new to your group, I forget, this doesn't work for you anymore because you have the board set up. The one that I have still from the mid-90s, you shuffle the tiles, you put them down, you shuffle the ports, put them down. You still have that set too? I see you nodding. You get someone who's never played. As you turn these over, give them the water that goes between the ports, face down, tell them to shuffle those while you're shuffling these. That's always fun. They turn them over like, they're the exact same. So, that's get somebody started right. They don't trust you to begin with. So, yeah, but so clearly the right move there to win the game was to take all the sheep,
Right.
trade them off, and then get everybody's sheep back, leave everybody without anything, and run 4 points. But in the longer aspect and in the social aspect, nobody likes that. I mean,
True.
right? Like my own wife wouldn't talk to me for like the rest of the night. I mean, she was like really like she's like that was a dick move. I'm like, oh yeah, but it's a game. She's like, you have to be like that.
Yeah.
Okay, well if you got a well played group, cool, right? Then you should do that. But that's where like it's kind of the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? You can spot that move. You got to know what group you can do that move with. So here's another up front. If anybody says, "Oh, let's play Ticket or Ride," I'm like, "Are we being nice or not?" I mean, I got to know. I'll play either way. If you're like, "No, we're just going to be nice," then I'm not going to like purposely build on your one spot. That's you're going to get 2 contracts, and so I'm just going to build right there. And you got to go around. Then I'm going to cut you off there too. But I'm going to wait till you get almost there and cut you off. If we're playing mean, that's what I'm going to do. But if we're not playing mean, because I can get less contracts if you get no contracts. Right, so I could play mean or I could play nice. So you got to kind of find out. You got to know there's some wisdom, which is critical thinking skills.
Right.
Right, it's easy to do. Like I think that's one of the beautiful things about Ticket or Ride is it can be a purely math game. If you're like, okay, we're gonna play nice, then you just got to determine like, okay, how many turns do I have? How can I get the most contracts in the area? You're probably, if you can get 2 or 3 East Coast contracts, short contracts, you get something, from Chicago to Miami, and you get something DC, and then you just draw as many cards as you possibly can and get anything East Coast. Eventually, you'll have them all, because each turn you don't have to build a lot to get all those contracts. But if you're playing mean, you got to take a different strategy. So you've got this like that's a critical thinking skill is to how to interact with the people you're playing games with. And sometimes we overlook that. And that's why one of the things when I mentioned I brought my kids up on board games is that I bought games where they had to work together,
Right.
and I bought games where they had to absolutely work against each other and compete. And then I try to use those to teach them to be a good human either way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then with role playing, I grew up on Dungeons and Dragons as I mentioned, and my favorite thing. If any of you played D&D? Oh, but people. Have you ever had anybody ask you, what is it? My favorite answer, it's a game with no rules. And they're like, huh? Well, you got all those books and stuff and all the dice and all the little things. I'm like, yeah, no rules. It's like life. There's really no rules. There's consequences every decision you make, but there's no rules. Like we understand certain things. I can't stand up here and just start peeing in front of everybody. Like that's right. But it's not really a rule. It's just there's a lot of consequences to that. Okay, and that's the difference. If you're fighting a boss in a video game, you can't do just anything you want to, right? You can't like I don't know, cast a spell on another player to make them do something that's with not in their skill set. You can't create something that's not in the game. But in Dungeons and Dragons, you can. There are literally no rules in Dungeons and Dragons. There are books and books and methods to determine what happens based on the decisions that you make. If you're in, all right, you're playing Skyrim, you can't get into a building. You can't take your axe and smash the hinges and open the door. Now, in Dungeons and Dragons, you can try to do that. Now, you're going to have to make a skill set, and you're going to have to make a strength roll and all these things. So, but if you ever want to get somebody hooked to at least think about it or give it a shot, rather than try to describe it, blow their mind and say, oh, I play it because there's no rules. A game with no rules? You got to tell me more. Right? And so there can even be critical thinking skills as to how you describe what you do when you play games. So
yeah, no, I agree. I think one of the other things, especially with role playing games, as a skeptic and for a while in Phoenix, as part of the Phoenix Skeptics, I would go out and we would do things. We would debunk certain things. And one of the skills that you see so-called psychics using a lot is cold reading. And that's just the ability to look at somebody, listen to their voice, watch their movements, judge their how they're looking, the way they're feeling, the words they're choosing, and sort of figure out what they would like or what they wouldn't like. Well, in role playing games, as a game master, you or even as another player, you pick up because you're playing with the same people. You get to know them. You begin to pick up these clues.
Sure.
You can see when a player their character is close to death or they're really worried about something, and you can know to back off.
Yeah.
Or that, and being able to see that with other people is to me gives a really great perspective and kind of inoculates you against psychics and their abilities, because you can watch what they're doing and know why it's working or
Sure.
why it isn't working. And I think that's just a real neat sort of side effect that you can get out of this stuff. In terms of entertainment, obviously, as a magician doing cold reading or as a game master doing cold reading, when you see one of your players getting excited, you know to push this,
Yeah.
to make them happy, to have them come along with it. If you're doing a horror game, and you can see people getting uneasy, you learn to push it just a little bit more, and then when to back off because you're watching them, and using those skills out in the real world. Again, great perspective on psychics.
Sure.
Great
Oh,
inoculation.
and this works if you're at work on a team.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah,
You're doing
yeah.
a team. So one of the things that you can learn in not just your communication skills, but these critical thinking skills and how to use that. Like if any of you have a job where you work with a team or you have a project or you have a goal or you have something, you may have the best idea in the world. If you can't communicate it or people aren't going to listen to you, it doesn't mean anything. So being able to use these skills can be important. And then within the game, I don't know how many times I've had people ask me, well, like when you DM, like how hard do you make it for your like like do you like try to kill your whole party and have a TPK or like what do you and this is a discussion you and I had a couple years ago, and I loved your answer. You said I look at the group and I determine what is fun for them. If you have a beginner group and you just wipe them out every time, they're not going to hang around and play.
Right.
But if I'm playing and I don't, if the game's not hard enough that I risk losing a character, then I'm bored because I've played a lot, and so you kind of got to look around and determine like I'm not gonna like fudge the game too much. I mean, there's got to be. It's just like Dungeons and Dragons. If you don't have consequences, it's just not. It's not.
Right.
Maybe it's not the game for you. But I'm not also. I've played enough. If I bring a new party and I can kill the party every time if I want to.
Sure.
So it's just like, what is going to be fun? What is the threshold of, it's like watching a horror movie, right? Like, I want to be scared, but I don't want to be grossed out. Or like somebody else, like, I don't mind being grossed out. Like, you kind of got to know your party. What is their threshold? How much risk do they want to? How much adventure? How much risk?
I mean, one of the things we always used to say in the early days was you don't have to kill all of your players. You just need to make them think they're going to die.
Yeah.
So you take it right up to that edge. So when they win, they think they've really earned it.
Sure.
And if you have to fudge a die roll here or there, or, sure, you attack them with 12 goblins, they kill 10 of them, the other 2 run away.
Yeah.
Logical consequence, you can do that. Whereas if you, used all 12, now we're looking at, total party kill, and it's not going to be a good thing.
Right. And for some players it will. Some
Yeah.
groups don't mind, right? So there's some a lot of critical thinking from that aspect too, and then like developing when you run a game. I always backstory every character in every town in every place, and I know that like a majority of that work is just for me because they're never going to go up and they go in the shop. They might not ask the person that's looking at books anything, but if they do. In my game, that person looking at books has a story, and there's a reason why they're looking at the books they're looking at and whatever, and that may tie back in the story later, kind of depending on where the party goes with something. So, that's something that I like to do. So I'm actually like critical thinking skills of like how would this type of character be an NPC, and how
Right.
would they be a main player, and how did this information get from here to here? And so I got someone who's dragonborn, and then they're over here and they're traveling. Well, why are they dragonborn? And we're in this this area in the desert where there's no dragonborn, and so now they have to have a backstory that put them there.
Sure.
And so I have my players create backstories for their characters that influences like what skills they've got and what spells they take and all that kind of stuff. And so it just it just helps you think through critical thinking. Sometimes we overthink like what is that, but a lot of it is just getting to where you make better decisions and seeing the world for what it is. And so when you're working in a world that you're either creating or someone else has created, being able to use those same things with the consequences not affecting your real life can be great practice and a great way to learn critical thinking skills.
Absolutely. I think the flip side, and again, it works to. It's not really critical thinking, but it's learning how to think quickly and thinking on your feet.
I'll just get married.
Well, okay, yeah, I've ducked that bullet, but but in a game,
Yeah.
you hand out the treasure after they've killed a monster, and they've got X number of gold pieces, and there's a knife, and your player says, "Is it an elven knife?" Well, you as the game master just have knife.
Right.
That's all that's down there, and it's like, oh, I don't know. Make a perception roll.
Right.
And
well,
they
I think about it.
Yeah. Well, they roll, and you go, oh, that's an interesting result. Yeah, you think it's elven. You're going to want to have this checked out, which gives you the time
Right.
to, be building stuff out in front of them. And you literally can have them entertain themselves by just listening to their chit chat back and forth and go, yeah, I can build in front of that. That's not hard.
Here's another way to go with this, right? How many of you ever DM'd a game and you had like this major thing that was so obvious that the group had to do, like it's clearly the only right thing to do, and no matter what you try to kind of like hint at, they didn't do it, right? Right. Don't panic when they go somewhere else and they ask you a question like, "Well, is this an elven knife?" Give me a perception check. You don't know, but you realize that the gentleman in the library in the previous town had that same symbol on his pennant. And so now they got to go back and talk to the guy that you're trying to get him to talk to before, right? There's ways to go there.
Yeah.
So these things, there's critical thinking skills for you and your players. And then board games, it's a different interaction, but it's the same. Like it's these same thoughts, and it can take place over a variety of board games. So I know a lot of people raise their hand with Dungeons and Dragons. How many of you play board games? Board gamers? A lot of those too, right? How many of you just strictly like online gaming? All right, a few of those. All right, cool. So these are all skills, and I imagine you probably came here like wondering some things and had some questions already. So we've got like 20 minutes left. Let's take some questions if you've got. We've got a mic here. This is a magic mic. Don't touch the mic when you get close. The mic will adjust to your height, and as long as you speak clearly, they'll even adjust the volume when they need to. But tell us where you're from, what type of gaming you like, and what is your question?
Sure. Thank you. Very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
My name's Cam. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. My favorite games are Twilight Imperium, Blood on the Clock Tower, and Dogs in the Vineyard.
That's a nice mix.
Yeah, you got it.
Right?
I've enjoyed some of your other panels in the Skeptrack earlier this weekend, and I wanted to hear you marry up what you know about deception with what you know about deception and social deduction board games, and just have any thoughts on those to share with the gamers in the room.
I love social deduction games. I do. And what's funny is we're finding out in the deception area. So I don't know, those of you who don't have his knowledge of my discussions this week. I'm a deception expert. I was a magician by trade for years. And COVID made me unemployed, and I was doing a guest lecture at a university in the lying and deception class. And so the professor there is like, hey, this COVID could last a while, and you only had a year left in your degree from what I understand. You should go back to school and finish your degree. So like, I'm a magician. I'm not going to get a degree. I'm too old. My kids are in college now. And he said, no, you really should. Like, you'd make a great professor if COVID makes it where you're not going to perform anymore. For the first time, I thought, oh my goodness, I spent my entire life being something that might not exist anymore. That was kind of scary. And then he helped me get a full scholarship. So I finished my degree, and I met one of the world's foremost authorities in deception research, who fully funded me and an additional scholarship to get my master's degree, less than 45 minutes from my house. That led to me, now I am working on my PhD in human communication deception and social influence. So you asked me, like, great question. And what we're finding out really is the best way to deal with deception is really look for the evidence. Like, there's always this, it's the sexy thought to think that I can look somebody in the eyes and tell if you're telling me the truth. Oh, you got your feet pointed to the door. That tells me that you're nervous. You want to leave this situation, so you must be lying. Well, but for everybody that points their feet towards the door when they want to lie, there's people that are nervous because they have social anxiety that point their feet towards the door. So these social deduction games, if you worry too much about how somebody's acting, you can be fooled more than if you think about, based on what's happened so far in this game, what's more likely? This person is telling the truth or telling the lie, and then start looking to connect the dots, and then you can kind of like blood in the clock tower, right? You never answer questions really direct in the blood in the clock tower, but a great strategy is to tell a general truth or something that is a lie that's general enough it could be true, and then like hone that down. And you can ask two different people similar questions, and if they give you different answers, at least one of them's got to be on the other team. So you start looking for evidential things. A nice thing I like to do with particularly blood in the clock tower is ask a question that could be answered generally, but someone who knows would answer more specifically, and then then start thinking about who have they been talking to. You also look for certain trends. So just like if anybody plays poker, the trends in how somebody plays cards is way more important than what they do when they play those cards. So if somebody looks nervous, if their hands are shaking, if they're looking away or whatever, isn't as important as if you know that every time they make a big hand, they bet big because they want to maximize their win, and every time they miss their draw, they bet small. But there could be another player at the table. Every time they miss their hand, they bet big, hoping to make you fold. If you ever find somebody has a very reliable way of doing a particular game, that is the most useful information you could use against him. It doesn't matter what type of game it is. And so when I do social deduction games, I look for patterns of behavior, and those are more scientifically reliable than tells. And so when you look at patterns of behavior, you'll find there's somebody that you play whatever game. If you've got a regular group that plays, you'll find there's at least one person within the first few weeks of trying that, you'll know how they play all their games. There's a guy that plays in my game, and he's playing the Rambo style. It doesn't matter what time of game. He's going to do a maximum build. It looks like he was raised playing, like a first-person shooter game. And the first thing he wants to do is like build out his character with every weapon he can possibly find. So I know when we play, I know exactly what he's going to try to do. And so if he's on my team, I'm gonna play everything around except getting weapons, because he's gonna have every weapon you can possibly find in the game. But if I know I'm not on his team, it's gonna be really hard for him to get weapons past me. So that's how I approach social deception games. Is I look for tendencies. Some people really don't like to lie, and some people love to lie. So if they look more comfortable in a role, it's not any particular like tell, it's just comfortability. Some people just really don't like to lie. And so if they're a bad guy or they're playing a subversive role and they look way less comfortable than normal, regardless of what the behavior is, they're more likely to be bad. And so then I'm going to start. Now I'm going to use that to look for evidence. Like, okay, they seem to be aligned with this person. Are they now doing something that seems like it might be a saboteur towards us winning this game, or does it? Are they throwing shade on somebody when we're talking about who we're going to kill for the next night? And so that's how I approach those types of games. Yes.
I guess I'm probably, I don't know, I'm one of the players that you don't really like that much, but
I like all players.
I generally go more towards PC games, but for the point of having the group sort of against the DM.
Sure.
And benefits that, I really enjoyed MPH's one. People don't play with me, so that's why. But are there other games that bring together the deception is the game, and the group has to work towards figuring that out, or is there other good examples of that?
Yeah. So, can you be a little more? There's a lot of deception type games. So, can you be a little more specific on what do you mean by the deception is the game?
I was thinking that more towards your. I'm trying to think of more examples of it.
Sure.
One was the one where the person making the game is trying to trick, and they've locked somebody up. That was Neil Patrick Harris's game. But I see that in a lot of PC games where the person making the game and you're trying to figure out how to break it. Portal was a great game like that.
Okay.
Like those sort of things. That there's other good examples of that.
Yeah. Do you know any type of games that are designed that way, where it's the players versus? I know there's several games that have like modes of that. Like one of my favorite 2-player games is Hero Realms. It's a fantasy version of Star Realms, and there is a all versus one version of that. Now, not in the line of deception, but Last Night on Earth is everybody's playing characters versus the person running is doing zombies. And so there are a lot of those types of games. I can't think of anything that's specifically straight deception that way. Now you might have to develop a game.
Well, one of the first games that was sort of all against one came out of England in the 60s, early 70s, and it was Escape from Colditz.
Oh,
and it was
yeah.
and so one player was the Nazi commandant running this prison camp.
You know, they remade that recently. It's a great game.
Yeah, and what was interesting in the original game, the strategy notes by the designer, who was a prisoner, from this Colditz Castle was a castle where the Germans took people who had escaped from other stalags and put them all together in this place you could not escape from. And of course, you put people who can escape from anything into a place where you can't escape from it, and that's immovable object, irresistible force kind of thing. But this this British officer who designed the game talked about because one player would be the Nazi commandant. He said, "Look, for you to win as that, you have to be harsh, you have to be brutal, you have to punish these things." And he lined it out, and everybody else had to cooperate, and that was a game where you had to assemble things so that you had an escape kit, so you could possibly get your characters away, and so there would be trading back and forth and those things.
I played this last month.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, totally.
Yeah, we lost.
It's a mind blower of a game when you end up playing it. The other games that are heavy deception games. They were real popular 10, 15 years ago. I think they're probably going to be making a comeback. Were a lot of the how to host a murder game, where everybody's got a role in it, and depending upon which products you were buying, some were really, really basic, and they were for people who don't play games at all, and just an excuse to drink. And then there were some games that were far more nuanced.
You can drink while you play?
Yeah, Yeah, you can. Some of them are far more nuanced, and I was talking to a guy who's working on a company that's going to be bringing some more out, and one of the things I would love to see in there is if you are a role player, this is how this could work out. Remember, I was playing the game, playing one of those games one time. I was in Austin and. With a lot of Steve Jackson's people, and it turned out I was the murderer, and the guy that I had killed was an ex-Nazi secretary, and Steve was playing a Nazi hunter, and so but they were and I had accidentally poisoned the wrong person, but they were working with the Nazis, so who cares? But as the way the rules of the game were set up, they had to catch me, and we had to do this. But as Steve said, in the real world, because he was the one who figured out who was guilty, he would have just said to me, "Let's knock this asshole off, and we'll get you out of the country."
Right.
So if you're a role player, you can have an entirely different outcome for this game.
Sure. Spyfall is a. I don't know if you ever played Spyfall. Spyfall is somebody else played Spyfall? Okay, it's a social deduction type game. Briefly, the premise is like it doesn't matter how many people you got. You get 4, 5, 10 people, whatever, and everybody that you shuffle cards. There's one person who gets a card that just says you're the spy. And everybody else gets one that tells where we are. And then there's a board that has like a whole bunch of locations. The beach, a theme park, the library, a museum, this International Space Station, like all these, a desert, like all these different things, snow skiing, all these different things. And so the premise is that we're all communicating through headsets. And we found out that one of us is a spy. The spy has no idea where we are, where we're supposed to be going for work. And so they're trying to figure this out so they can go and infiltrate it. So if you're the spy, you know nothing. But what you can do in your turn is you ask somebody else a question relevant to what we're doing. And you want to ask a question that if I don't know who's the spy, I want to ask you a question that you could answer, but not so obvious it gives it away, right? So if we're at the theme park, I might say, well, are there a lot of people where we work? If you're the spy, you have no idea, because if we're in the space station, that answer is flat no. Right? But if it's a theme park, it's flat yes. So now, if you're the spy and you could ask the question, you have to come up with an answer that sounds like you might know, but you without getting caught. But if you answer too directly, once the spy is located, you've got a certain amount of time to do this. And then the game ends, and everybody has to vote who you think the spy is. If you're wrong, spy wins.
Well,
if you're right and the spy can tell you where we are, he still wins.
Right.
So that might scratch that itch for you. All right, next question.
Hey, my name's Brad Lance. I'm from Greenville, South Carolina, and I've been a video game designer for over 12 years.
Oh, excellent.
And I really like board games because I feel like that's a medium where I can express things that computers can't do.
Right.
So that's my goal, is to make a game where you just can't program it. And I have this game where it's a courtroom drama, you're a defense attorney or the prosecutor, and you have this alibi, motive, and evidence pile, and you draw, say, baseball bat, and you can say, okay, I'm going to put that in alibi. They were at a baseball game at the time of the murder. You could put it in evidence and be like, oh, their baseball bat was found at the scene of the crime. Or you could put it in alibi or a motive and say, they stole their signed baseball bat by Babe Ruth and it drove them to murder. And I struggle so hard when I play test this because I feel like some people just aren't creative. They draw these cards and they're just blank and they have no idea how to play the game. And I'm just curious, the critical thought process I've been struggling with is, how do I unlock that creative side in people? What do I add to the game to maybe bring that creativity back to life, put them back in the kids' shoes where they were playing cowboys and Indians and playing make-believe?
So I think this is a better question for you, so I'll answer first so you can give the right answer. All right? My first thought is counter to how it's nice to be able to make games right off the bat, because budget's always a concern. But if you could make two modes where you have the baseball bat, so like you're going to play with deck A, and on that it says baseball bat, and then it says the three things you just said. If you want to use this for motive, use it for this, and then try to give them some creative skills as to how you're linking your story together, but you're spoon feeding them like what the motive would be or what the evidence would be or whatever. And then suggest, after you've played this game, 2 or 3 times with your group, use deck B where you have these, but it doesn't tell you what the motive is, and then you have to make those things up. And so it might walk them through, even if it gives them the ideas ahead of time, so they might remember some of the things you told them, but they won't remember everything, so they're kind of, as they play the game a few times, it also gives your game more playability, and it sells more copies. So there is that, right? So you could have 2 decks, one that walks them through what each of those things could be, and one of them that doesn't, that encourages that. You could also have it where you have both decks available. You may draw from deck A or deck B, depending on how you want to play. So you could have a game where everybody has a choice. I'm drawing deck B every time because I want the story to be my story. But somebody else that doesn't want to do that, they could have that A option. What would be your solution on that?
Well, the first thing you got to do is just plain Skinnerian stuff. You have to reward success. I think the issue you've got with your game is that the baseball bat can drop into any of those 3 slots, and that's certainly a limited choice. but then your explanation of why it is in those slots is infinite. And that's where people freeze. That's where they get scared. So what I might look at doing is, if you have baseball bats, there's one that's labeled motive, there's one that's labeled evidence, there's one that's labeled alibi. So as the cards drop, that would, so you're limiting their choices. Now they just have to come up with a good story. Or if I were going to shift the game or look at a different design, um, you would put down a baseball bat. Every player would have, to them, they would have a hand or they would have 3 cards. One is a motive card, one is an evidence card, one is an alibi card. And so you put those cards face down. End of the turn, we all turn them over, and whoever put down a card, whatever the majority is, so 4 players, 3 of them say it should be alibi. Okay, they flip it over, and then each one of them has to come up with why it's an alibi, and you vote as to which alibi is correct. This is the most plausible alibi. They were at a baseball game, and someone else says, no, they were at a charity auction for sports memorabilia, and this is the bat that they brought, right? And so you got a little bit of competition as one person is attempting to top the next person, is attempting to top the next person, and then essentially they win the trick. Whoever everybody votes had the best alibi, they win the trick, and so they get that card. That would be the way you'd stimulate their creativity. You're gonna have to deal with the fact that some people just are not creative in that way because they don't feel comfortable doing it. They think they're going to get it wrong, and so it may be a little bit harder sell. But I think what you're describing could be really, really cool. It looks like it could be a relatively fast and fun game, but it is going to be for a highly select audience, people who enjoy thinking on their feet. Cards Against Humanity sort of does the same thing in terms of, so you got a big audience there, that potential audience, but you're just going to have to do something that'll help stimulate their desire. Yeah.
So hopefully that gives you a few ideas to play with.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, so we are at 7 minutes. We're going to try to get through each of these. So we're going to take the questions relatively short. We're probably going to give relatively short answers, and then we might suggest hanging out a little bit afterwards if we need to expound on that. But we're trying to get everybody in. So this will be the last 4 questions. Go.
All right. Hello, my name's Liam. How do you think critical thinking is different in online games as opposed to in-person board games?
I think it's going to be different in every game, whether it's online or a board game or a tabletop game, because they all each game is designed, and the designer has a certain idea or framework that they're giving you, and so you're going to have to approach each of those games differently. And so, you can take 2 online fantasy games, right? Like you can take Final Fantasy and Skyrim, and the way you play those, it's not going to be the same. So the game itself is invoking different skills, but the idea of critical thinking is really adapting to the game and trying to think through. If you play enough online games, you'll find, and then if you play enough board games by the same designer, you'll find out how that person or that designer thinks, and then you'll start to get better at that game. So it's part of that whole idea of adapting to the game. That's part of that critical thinking skill. So I think that it's not just like online versus tabletop, but it's like game to game to game to game. So that, to me, that's a big difference.
And I think the other thing, especially with online games, there are millions of resources out there that will tell you how to optimize what it is you should do with your character. I mean, I play a lot of World of Warcraft, and so for any character, there are guides of this is the ultimate rotation you have to do with this character. The problem is I'm not comfortable doing that because that doesn't feel the way my character would act. So I have to go and learn different ways to get, to realize that maximum potential playing to a style that I like.
Right, but that also applies to other games too.
Oh yeah,
right?
absolutely. 100%.
I've got a son. I don't know if any of you play Magic the Gathering, but I've got a son who has top 12 3 regional tournaments in the last 12 months. He plays Merfolk. Right? You're like, Merfolk? Yeah. because he's like, I don't care what the best deck is. I care about being the best Merfolk player because that's what I like, and I'll find a way to beat better decks with Merfolk.
Yeah.
He played against a pro in an event, and it was to the point where they could. So if you're not familiar with the tournaments, anyways, they had a situation where they could agree to chop, basically. Like, we'll both disagree that we split this game, and we'll both top 12. And the guy who was playing was a pro, and he's like, dude, I'm a pro, I need the points. And my son beat him 2-0. And he goes, good luck with the points. And so my son made top 8 as opposed to them both making 11. So, like, there's that aspect in, it doesn't matter if it's a, solo game, if it's a 2-person game, 10-person game, online, tabletop, board game. There's always those aspects. Good question. All right, next.
Hi, I'm Steven, and I have a question and an observation or comment.
Sure.
The question is, I'm a longtime player of like tabletop games, but I'm kind of itching to try my hand at GMing. But
Nice.
it seems very daunting to me, how to plot something that's either not so obtuse that the players never
Sure.
can get it, versus they solve the murder or whatever in the very first 5 minutes.
So I would find most games have some pre-done modules that people have created or the designers have created.
Yeah, not so much for a hero system for superheroes. So
Okay. So I would get on some online forums. I'm sure there's some threads on Reddit. And then
Okay.
like read through there and ask. And you're going to clearly see guys that are complete jerks as GMs.
Mm.
And they're like, oh, I do this, and like my players will never find, the most expensive, so whatever. And then okay, I'll never do those things.
Mm.
And then find someone else who seems like, hey, like I would love to play under this person and do that. One of the professors I had one time told me as I started to teach classes, he said, be everything as a professor that your favorite professors were, and never do the things that the professors you hated did.
Mm.
And those things separated really fast for me. It was very easy. The professors I liked the most cared about me, cared that I had success, and gave me the tools to understand the information. The professors that I hated or disliked the most were on power trips or cared nothing about what I learned. It was their material. They are the boss. And so as far as teaching, that influenced my teaching style. And I would say if you went through and read some Reddit threads on your particular game, you'll start to spot things you like about the way people interact with that game, and try to think about that as you GM. And it's an iterative thing. You'll do the first one, and you're like, oh, you feel like you did terrible, and then your player's like, oh, that was the greatest, I love that. And then you'll find what they like and just kind of gravitate towards those things.
Okay.
Yeah, and remember, you as a GM, you're there to entertain.
Yeah.
So one of the things you can do before you ever set out a scenario or anything like that, make sure that everybody who's playing in your group have similar goals. I mean, if all they want to do is to do for hero, they just want to have a superhero slugathon and that's it, versus running a detective Batman style campaign. Make sure they're all on the same page, and then you set it up for that. And then talk to your players, figure out what they want to do to develop each individual character, and pay court to that during the game. Each scenario you run, there's going to be a step forward for at least one of the players.
Yeah.
Okay.
If your players desire lots of information, give them information. They just want to buzz through. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and you just do it that way. You'll get the hang of it. They'll cut you some slack. You'll do fine.
The nice thing about GMing, they don't know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
So,
True.
like, if what you start to do is not working, just change it. They don't know.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right.
Okay.
Great question.
And
All right.
the observation was that Michael Stackpole is, I believe, the reason why BattleTech fusion power plants blow up as spectacularly as they do.
No, actually, I'm not.
Really?
No,
That's the myth then.
No, it's. So he's talking about in the game, in the very early iteration of the game, the rules simply stated: you get 3 engine hits, the mech is destroyed. Okay. The engines are fusion engines, boiling hot plasma. What happens when an engine's containment vessel is destroyed? What happens to that boiling hot plasma?
Well, it depends on how much of it there is.
Well, okay. there's enough to be driving a 100-ton war machine and powering all of its weapons. What happens to that plasma?
In myth, or I mean, in fiction, or in real life?
In real life, in
Okay.
physics, it expands, it destroys stuff, it melts stuff, and you get a mushroom-shaped cloud because that's the way physics works. And it said, the rules said, again, the mechs are destroyed. The fact that players early on, A, didn't understand physics, and B, didn't read those rules, not my fault.
Uh-huh.
They lay it at my feet, God
Right.
bless them, but you know, not my
Okay.
fault.
All right, so we're out of time. Can we take 2 more questions, or are we on a hard stop? All right. Pressure's on. Quick, nice question. All right, gotcha.
Hello, my name is Mariko, and my favorite game is probably Zombicide.
Yeah.
But while that might be the case, I really like games like Radlands, where it's like a 1v1
Oh, yeah.
battle of the minds sort of
Sure.
thing. I was wondering if you guys had an example of a game that was like 1v1 but cooperative.
So a real good game, Ogre.
Ogre?
From Steve Jackson Games.
Mhm.
One person can be running the Ogre. You can have other people running all the different forces, and go out hunt that way. And Ogre is a wonderful game.
There you go.
That's perfect. Thank
Great.
you.
Radlands is like, you gotta play that game with somebody else a lot, because that game gets super niche-y technique really fast. Marvelous game. Very frustrating if you play somebody that's played a lot and you haven't. But yeah, great. Hey, thanks for coming so much. If you have any questions, we'll hang out up here.
Thanks.